AWS SageMaker is highly used in industry for building and deploying machine learning models at scale. In this series of 2 videos, you will learn how to implement this pipeline here. First, we have the pre-processing part, where we have the original data hosted in an S3 bucket. And from that S3 bucket, we process that data into training and validation data to be saved into another bucket. Once the data is available, then SageMaker is going to leverage that data to fine-tune our classification model, which is precisely a text classification model. After successfully training the model, the endpoint will be available on SageMaker. And then the natural thing will be for an end user to interact with our model. First, the user will send request to an API gateway. And that API gateway will send the payload to Lambda function, and that Lambda function will then have to retrieve the endpoint in order to interact with the model. The model will then run the magic to return the results to the user in a JSON format. In this first video, we will cover the processing part and training of the machine learning model, then deploying into production. And in the second video, we will cover the second part about building Lambda function, creating an API gateway, and also interacting with that model. I ran into an issue with my camera, so I turned it off for a better experience. We are going to use AWS CLI to interact with our AWS resources. So we start by checking if we have that CLI installed by running the AWS -- version. Here I have the correct version on my machine. If you run into any issue, then you can check out this website depending on your operating system to install the correct AWS CLI command. All right, let's get back to business. First, we start by running the installation of AWS SageMaker and IP widget. This is going to install AWS SageMaker in our environment along with some flavors to interact with AWS SageMaker. All right, here we can see that the installation is successfully completed. Then we import relevant libraries like SageMaker, Boto3, JSON, and all these libraries. And we have this myconfig file, which contains some information relevant to using our to efficiently running the training and deployment of our models into production. So first of all, what we need to do is to create a user. And that user is going to be able to access the resources available on AWS. And we can have that by coming into our console. First, we do that from IAM, and from IAM, we create a user. IAM users, we create a new user, and let's call that user SageMaker classification user. All right. And once we have that, we select next to be able to create that user. And at this level, we select attach policies directly to see the permissions, and we give that user the administrator access so that he can perform the necessary actions on AWS. And once we have that, we select next. And after that, we create our user. And by creating that user, what we are going to have from that user here, we'll have a lot of information. For instance, we come into security credentials. In security credentials, we look at the create access keys. These create access keys, so since we want to interact via command line interface. So we select command line interface and check I understand the above recommendation, then next. And you can give a description to but that description is completely optional, so let's leave this empty and create access key. And from here we have the access key and secret key that we can use to connect to AWS, but let's download this as a CSV file. Here is the contents of the CSV file that we have downloaded. We have access key and also secret key. Those two keys will be used to connect to AWS. Now that we have those keys available, now we can configure our environment to be able to connect to AWS. So AWS configure, this is going to ask the access key. The access key is what we have copied. We have downloaded from AWS. We paste that here. Secret key, we copy that secret key from the same CSV file. And for the default region name, we can have that from here. I will be operating in North Virginia on US East 1. So I provide US East 1. US East 1. And default output format, that's none. All right. After the configuration, we can list all the buckets in our environment. So AWS LS, AWS S3, LS. Here we have the buckets currently available in our environment. Let's start by creating a new bucket. So we come into S3, type S3, so that we can create a new bucket. And from S3, let's create bucket. General purpose and bucket name is SageMaker classification bucket. SageMaker classification bucket, and we'll leave everything else by default for simplicity's sake. Now we create our bucket. Now we have our SageMaker classification bucket. This is the bucket that we are going to use for the experimentation. And now if we come back again in the console and type AWS S3 LS, we should see the new bucket that has been created. Here we have our new bucket that has been created. And since this is the bucket that is going to be used for the experimentation, then we copy the name of that bucket and paste in my bucket name here. All right. So this is the creation of the buckets. Next, we need to create a role to access both SageMaker and S3. This is also performed from a IAM section. So let's open this in another tab. Makes things easier. And from the search bar, let's type IAM. Once we get into IAM, we come into role. And from role, create role. When creating this role, what we're going to perform is AWS service. And in the search bar, type SageMaker. And this is going to create a role with permission to access SageMaker, full access to SageMaker. Next, give the name, the role a name. Let's say SageMaker execution, or let's say SageMaker classification role. All right. Now let's say we are creating that role. And after creating that role, what we can find the name of the role, SageMaker classification role. And within that role, we can also add a policy, attach a policy. Now we need S3 full access. This is going to have full access to both put data in S3 and also retrieve data from S3, because when we are training the model, SageMaker needs to have those rules for putting data into S3 and also pulling data from S3. And we add permission. Once we have that, then we copy the ARN of the role that we put in the configuration file that we are using here. So my AWS role. Here we put the AWS role that is going to be performed to have all the accesses. Now let's get back to our scenario. And after the change, we reload the configuration file so that the last information added into the function are taken into consideration. Now we can print or we can save both the AWS region, the session, and the bucket name that is going to be used. So we have those information available and we can print them here. And we have the AWS region, which is US East 1. SageMaker session is the session that is going to be used. AWS role is the one that we have created, and the bucket name is the bucket that we have also created previously. All right, now the model that we are going to use is a pre-trained model. So we get the ID of that model, and I'm getting that from here. This is the ID of the model that we are going to use. Is TensorFlow or BERT and uncased model that we are going to fine-tune for classification. All right, so this is the first step of setting up the environment. After the environment is set up, now we can explore the step of fine-tuning the pre-trained model on Stanford Sentiment Treebank 2 datasets for movie reviews. This dataset has two main labels, 0 and 1. 0 meaning negative sentiment, 1 is positive sentiment. And first, we start by retrieving the jumpstart training artifacts. Those training artifacts are going to be used by SageMaker to set up the training sessions and also retrieve a Docker image containing all the information for the training and also retrieve the training scripts. The training instance type is the server that is going to be running the training. So the training instance type, mine is ml.c4 2 times large. This is my instance that is going to be used by SageMaker to trigger the training process. And now we retrieve a Docker image. That Docker image is going to set up the environment for training the model. And now we also retrieve a training script, which is also going to get provide the model ID, model version, and the scope for training. This is going to basically set up the script for training by providing those attributes. And now we retrieve the pre-trained model table to further fine-tuning. So let's execute this cell. And now we start by setting up the training parameters. The training parameters that we need to set up, we have a training data bucket. The training data bucket is available in a specific bucket called Jumpstart Cache Prod. Is also available in the region that we have specified here on US East 1 for our case, but I believe that it's also available across all multiple regions. So depending on the regions that you are going to use, then you'll be able to access your training data set. And training prefix is training dataset SSST. Now we have a training dataset S3 path. The training dataset S3 path is basically the concatenation of the training data bucket and the training data prefix. And the output bucket is our bucket, the one that we have created. Yeah, that's the bucket that we have created. Now we just get back and execute this cell as well. After we have these, now we set up the hyperparameters for fine tuning. Here we have the hyperparameter. The batch size is 64. I'm taking 64, but you can increase the batch size to like larger size or decrease if you want. The learning rate is 1 -6, and we are using Adam learning rates. And hyperparameter for epoch, like for simplicity's sake, and also for these tasks not to take too long, I'm just running for 1 epoch. And we can run this one as well. Let's print those hyperparameters to see how they have been configured. And this is the result of what we have set up in this section. Now what we can do now is to download the dataset, the S3. So this command is basically going to download the dataset, training dataset from the bucket that has been specified here and have it locally. So let's run this one. It's going to have all the steps for downloading the bucket. And we have that data set that has been downloaded from this bucket to this data folder. So we have here the data folder, and within that data folder, we have data.csv, which is this CSV file. Now let's have a look at our data and see what it looks like. Data heads, we have the first 5 rows of that data, and we can see that it has 2 columns, targets and sentence input, which is basically the text that we are going to analyze. And for a given text, we have the label. This is, for instance, a negative sentiment. And data shape, 68,000 plus. This is a lot of data, and using that data is like for training the model might also take a lot of time. But first, let's have a look at the unique targets, and we can see that we have exactly 2 values, binary classification, 0 and 1. And since we have a larger data set, then I'm not using a GPU for training and like for fine-tuning this model. I decide to take only 2% of the original data and setting the random state for 2024 for reproducibility. And let's take only 2% of that data, and 2% correspond to 1,364. And it should also give the same unique for targets. All right, so we have that sample data. That sample data is going to be used for the training purposes. And to be able to use that, first we import scikit-learn, and I believe that everybody learning about machine learning is familiar with scikit-learn model selection, train text split, and we create the training and test the data. Test might be also validation data, and we take 10% for testing and the remaining 90% for validation. And what we are doing now is to save this training data to CSV into a file called split train data, and we save that. And here we have that new CSV file that we can see here. All right, now that we have both the training data available and also the one that is going to be used for testing, we push that data into our S3 bucket. This is going to take that training data and push it into S3 bucket that we have created using the upload file function. And we run this one. We should be able now to see that new file into the S3 bucket. Let's get back to S3 bucket. We saw that it was empty, and now we should have that TC train, and we have that data set here. Now start the process of fine-tuning like without any hyperparameter optimization. So we use the estimator from SageMaker estimator, and here we have we create a SageMaker estimator instance. So we have estimator, the role. This is going to get the role from our configuration file, which is this role, and that role is given to the estimator so that it can have access to SageMaker and also S3 to perform all the tasks. We provide image URI for training image, source directory for training source. The model URI is also the training model, the endpoint, which is we're calling this transfer learning .py file. And my instance for the estimator is 1. I'm using 1 so that I can have 1 instance of my server. And max run is 350. Hyperparameters is the one that we have specified above. Output path is the S3 output path that we also specified above. And here we have a training data path updated. This is going to set up a new folder with the path S3, the bucket name that we have created, with prefix that we have given, and it's going to create a new folder called train, which is going to have the training data set. And now we can run the training of the model. This might take a couple of minutes depending on the speed of the internet. So I'm gonna pause the video and come back in a few minutes. Here we can see that the training is completed after 6 minutes, and we have a lot of information provided in the log. Like we have no GPUs detected during the training because I haven't set up any GPU. And also we have training seconds, 293, the billable second 293 as well. And here we can see that the uploading generated training model, training job is completed. And we can have all those details in the console. And let's come in the console. If you don't have SageMaker right here, you can just type SageMaker from the search bar and access SageMaker. And once we have SageMaker, then we come in the training section and look at the training job. And today is August 9th, 3 a.m. in the morning. So we have the SageMaker training job that has been completed, and it took 6 minutes. Let's have a look at that training job. Here we can see that we have a bunch of details performed that we can have for that specific job. Here we have the instance group. The instance type is MLC4 to X large, and this is exactly what we have here in the config file. This is the instance type that we have in the config file here. And let's get back again. So these are the details that we have from the training, and also the input data configuration for training has been put in the buckets. Let's have a look at the buckets that we have here. We can see that we have the output folder. Oh no, not that bucket. We can have, like, this is a new bucket that's been created. We have the output folder containing these files. We have a bunch of folders that have been created for the model to be successfully performing its tasks, and also the input folder, the train folder has the data CSV that is split into training and testing data. I mean, this is the training data that we have here, and it has been called data.csv. Okay, and now get back to the console. This is the end of the training. Now the next step is to deploy and run inference on the fine-tuned model. So we start by retrieving the inference Docker container, which is done with the deploy image URI. So we use the retrieve function. And after that, we retrieve also the inference script for URI. This is going to retrieve those details. And here is the step where we are deploying our model into SageMaker endpoint. And let's run this, and also we can get back. Those details should be available in the inference section. Endpoint, here this is currently empty, but once the endpoint is available, we should see a new endpoint in this section. So let's get back to the notebook. And it might also take a couple of minutes, mainly depending on your internet speed. Now, after 6 minutes, 36 seconds, we can see that the model has been successfully deployed into an endpoint. And let's see, and here we can see that the endpoint is available and also in service. So we can also click on that endpoint. We have more details about the endpoint name, the status, which means that it's in service, real time. The endpoints can be used real time for performing classifications, and also the date it has been deployed. Here we have like a lot of relevant information that can be used by team members to track which endpoint has been deployed, which day, and if the endpoint is available. And here we have also the alarm. Here we have 0 alarm, but in case there are alarms, we can see those information available here as well. Now let's get back to the codes. With that endpoint available, we can test the model by getting some ground truth and test example to see the model's performance. The goal here is not to provide you guys with the process of getting the best model. The idea is to walk you through the process of training a model, deploying that model into a production using SageMaker. So depending on the way you want to train the model is completely up to you. And here we have the query endpoints. Now we are going to provide additional information to the model in order to query the endpoint. Here we are parsing the response that is provided by the model. We get the probabilities the labels and the predicted labels. These labels are the ground truth labels, and here are the predicted labels. And finally, we run a for loop to get those details in order to perform the evaluation of the model here. And let's have a look at the accuracy and F1 score of that model. And here we start by importing accuracy score and F1 score. Now we get the accuracy, the results, and we put everything into a single data frame. And now we have the model accuracy and F1 score. This is, like I have mentioned, the goal is not in this section in this tutorial to show you how to get the best possible model. All right, so that's all for this first part. In the next part, I'll explain how you can create an endpoint. So this is going to be basically, I'm going to show you that part. In the next part, we are going to cover here, implement a Lambda function, have an gateway API, and the user will be able to interact with the model throughout the gateway API and also a Lambda function. So stay tuned and let's see and see you in the next video. Bye bye.